I am Maya, 35 years old, and the day my son Jamal turned 10 should have been a milestone of pure joy and celebration. 10 years ago, my husband emptied our joint savings accounts and walked out on me when I was 6 months pregnant, claiming he did not want a child tying down his future. He left me to marry his extremely wealthy mistress. Yet last Saturday, he had the absolute audacity to march right into my backyard cookout with a $2 million cashier check demanding full custody of the very son he abandoned simply because his new wife is infertile. When he smiled and told me to pack my boys' bags, my response did not just shock him, it completely dismantled his entire empire. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you believe a mother's love can never be bought by a trust fund. Growing up in Atlanta, Georgia, my family did not have immense wealth, but we had deep roots and an unbreakable bond. We were raised on the principle that family shows up for one another no matter what. After Terrence walked out on me a decade ago, leaving me with nothing but a mountain of unpaid utility bills and a swelling belly, my family became my fortress. My mother, my uncles, and my cousins rallied around me. They helped me turn my tiny kitchen hustle into a thriving corporate catering business. I worked 80-hour weeks building my company from the ground up, making sure Jamal never felt the absence of the man who chose a trust fund over his own flesh and blood. Jamal grew up surrounded by loud laughter, big Sunday dinners, and a village of people who adored him. That Saturday afternoon was supposed to be a testament to how far we had come. The Georgia sun was shining bright, and my spacious backyard was filled with the people who mattered most. Classic 90s R&B music was flowing from the speakers, setting the perfect vibe for a summer cookout. The air was thick with the mouth-watering scent of hickory smoke, brown sugar baked beans, and the ribs my Uncle Cedric had been slow roasting since dawn. Aunt Valerie was organizing the dessert table carefully, arranging the 3-tier superhero cake I had custom ordered for Jamal. My boy was running around the yard with his cousins, his face painted like a comic book character, laughing so hard he could barely breathe. It was a picture-perfect moment, a moment I had bled and sacrificed for 10 years to be able to provide. Then the heavy wooden side gate swung open. It did not just open, it was pushed back with an arrogant force that made the metal hinges squeak sharply. Uncle Cedric looked up from the grill. Aunt Valerie stopped moving the cake. One by one the laughter died down, until the only sound left was the low thumping bass line from the speakers. I turned around, wiping barbecue sauce from my hands with a paper towel, and my heart completely dropped into my stomach. Walking onto my freshly cut grass was Terrence. I had not seen him in the flesh since the day we finalized our divorce in a cold, sterile courtroom. He looked exactly like the money he had married into. He was wearing a navy blue custom-tailored Italian suit that probably cost more than my first car, and his shoes were polished to a mirror shine that had no business being at a backyard barbecue. His posture was rigidly arrogant, his chin tilted up as if the air in my yard was somehow beneath him. Trailing just half a step behind him, clutching his arm like it was a lifeline, was Chloe, the woman he left me for. She was dressed in a pristine white linen sundress and oversized designer sunglasses, looking around my yard with an expression of barely concealed distaste. She carefully stepped over a stray water gun on the grass as if it were toxic waste. The sheer disrespect of them showing up uninvited, crashing the one day that was entirely about the son Terrence had violently rejected, made the blood roar in my ears. My older brother David immediately stepped forward, his jaw clenched tight, sliding between Terrence and where Jamal was playing with his friends. The tension in the yard was suddenly thick enough to cut with a knife. Nobody spoke. We just stared at the ghost of a man who had caused so much pain. Terrence did not even have the decency to look ashamed. Instead, he marched right past my protective brother and walked straight up to the main patio table where the brightly wrapped birthday presents were stacked. He looked around the yard, taking in the plastic lawn chairs, the folding tables covered in vibrant tablecloths, and the humble but happy setup. He let out a soft, patronizing chuckle that made my hands curl into tight fists. "This is a cute little setup you have going on here." Terrence said, his voice loud enough for every single one of my relatives to hear. It is very folksy, very quaint. But let us be honest, it is a bit limiting for a growing boy, do you not think? I stood frozen for a fraction of a second, processing the sheer magnitude of his audacity. He had not sent a single birthday card in 10 years. He had not contributed a single dollar to diapers, to school clothes, or to hospital bills when Jamal had asthma attacks as a toddler. He had completely erased us from his life to fit into Chloe's high society world. And now he was standing in the sanctuary I had built, insulting my home and my family. Chloe pulled off her expensive sunglasses and gave me a tight, artificial smile that did not reach her eyes. "We just want what is best for the child, Maya," she chimed in, her voice dripping with that fake, condescending sweetness people use when they think they are better than you. Terrence and I have been discussing his future. We live in a gated estate now. We have access to the finest private academies, equestrian clubs, and elite social circles that you simply cannot provide on a caterer's unpredictable income. We think it is time Jamal experiences a real future. I felt my uncles shifting their weight behind me, ready to physically throw this man over the fence, but I raised my hand slightly, signaling them to hold back. I needed to handle this myself. I looked Terrence dead in the eye, refusing to let him see even an ounce of intimidation. "You do not get to walk into my home after a decade of silence and talk about my son's future," I said, my voice dangerously calm and steady. "You gave up the right to even say his name the day you walked out on us." Terrence just smirked, reaching his manicured hand into the inner pocket of his expensive suit jacket. "Oh, Maya," he said, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. "You always were too emotional to see the bigger picture. I did not come here to argue about the past. I came here to make an investment. Let us handle this like the adults we are supposed to be." He pulled a crisp piece of paper from the inner pocket of his tailored jacket. For a split second, my Uncle Cedric stepped forward, thinking he was reaching for a weapon, but it was something far more insulting. Terrence walked right over to the dessert table, exactly where Aunt Valerie had just finished arranging the superhero cake. With a slow and deliberate motion, he placed the piece of paper down right next to the brightly colored frosting. It was a certified bank check. I glanced down at it. The number printed across the center had so many zeros my brain struggled to process it at first. $2 million, payable to Maya Davis. I looked from the check back up to Terrence. "What is this?" I asked, my voice dangerously low. "Consider it back child support with a very generous interest rate," Terrence said loudly, making sure his voice carried over the murmurs of my family. $2 million tax-free. It is more money than you could ever hope to make flipping burgers and baking cupcakes. It is enough to buy yourself a nice house in a better neighborhood, maybe even start a real business instead of this little catering hobby. My brother David let out a harsh laugh of disbelief. "You think you can just walk in here after 10 years and hand my sister a check? Are you out of your mind?" Terrence ignored him, keeping his eyes entirely on me. "It is not just a gift, Maya. It is a settlement. I want full custody of Jamal. He is coming to live with us permanently." The entire backyard went dead silent. You could hear the sizzle of barbecue sauce dripping onto the hot coals of the grill. Fortunately, Jamal and his friends were busy playing on the giant inflatable slide on the far side of the yard, their joyful screams drowning out the toxic poison spewing from his so-called father's mouth. I thanked God my baby could not hear this. "You want what I asked," the words barely making it past the tightness in my throat. Terrence sighed dramatically, as if he were explaining a simple math problem to a slow child. "Do not make this harder than it needs to be. Chloe's family has a generational trust fund. It is worth hundreds of millions. But the stipulations of her grandfathers will clearly state that the primary beneficiaries must have a blood heir to access the principal accounts." He paused, gesturing to the woman standing next to him. "Chloe has recently discovered she is completely infertile. We have tried everything. The doctors say it is impossible, so we need an heir." Jamal is my biological son. He carries my DNA. That makes him the rightful heir to the estate. We are taking him. I stared at him, feeling a cold wave of pure disgust wash over my entire body. He did not want his son. He wanted a key to a vault. 10 years ago, Jamal was an inconvenience that threatened his bachelor lifestyle and his chances with a wealthy heiress. Now my beautiful 10-year-old boy was nothing more than a legal loophole for a trust fund. "You are trying to buy my son," I whispered, the sheer horror of the situation sinking in. "You came to his 10th birthday party to purchase him like a piece of property." Chloe stepped forward, placing a perfectly manicured hand on Terrence's arm. Her oversized sunglasses were pushed up into her hair, now revealing pale eyes that looked at me with pure condescension. "Please try to be reasonable, Maya," she said, her voice dripping with artificial pity. "You have done a fine job keeping him alive up to this point, but let us be realistic about what you can actually offer him. You are a single black mother running a small kitchen business. The statistics are not exactly in his favor if he stays here in this environment." My mother let out a sharp gasp from the porch, and Uncle Cedric gripped the heavy metal barbecue tongs so hard his knuckles turned gray. I held my hand up again, forcing everyone to stay back. I needed them to let this woman dig her own grave. Chloe continued, completely oblivious to the danger she was in. "If Jamal comes to live with us, he will never have to struggle. He will go to the best private schools in the state. He will have a trust fund, a network of elite connections, and a real future. He will be raised in a proper two-parent household with culture and refinement. Something you simply cannot provide on your own. The $2 million is more than fair compensation for your trouble. You can start over. Find a nice man at your level." The sheer audacity of this woman standing in my backyard, breathing my oxygen and insulting my entire existence, was staggering. She looked at my family, my home, my life, and saw nothing but poverty and struggle, simply because we did not live behind iron gates and carry country club memberships. She looked at my son and saw a commodity to secure her own generational wealth. Terrence tapped the check sitting next to the birthday cake. "It is a win for everyone, Maya. You get to be a millionaire, and Jamal gets a life you could only dream of giving him. I already have my lawyers drafting the paperwork. We will transition him to our estate this weekend. You can visit him on holidays if you maintain a respectful distance." I looked down at the check again. $2 million. For some people, that was lottery money. For Terrence and Chloe, it was the absolute price tag they had placed on my flesh and blood. They truly believed they could walk into my world, wave a piece of paper, and erase 10 years of my tears, my sleepless nights, my hard work, and my unconditional love. I reached out and picked up the certified check. Terrence smiled, a smug, satisfied grin spreading across his face. He actually thought I was going to fold. He thought my silence was the sound of surrender. He thought the money had blinded me just like it had always blinded him. Instead, I held the check loosely in my fingers. I did not scream. I did not cry. I did not give them the satisfaction of seeing the angry, emotional reaction they were so clearly waiting for. My mind was sharper than it had ever been, and my heart was absolute ice. I looked at the piece of paper in my hand. $2 million. I could feel the eyes of my mother burning into my back. I could hear my brother shifting his weight on the grass behind me. Terrence was still smiling, that arrogant little smile, fully expecting me to burst into tears of gratitude or scream in helpless rage. Instead, I took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the distance between us, until I was standing mere inches from his expensive Italian suit. I held the check up between us. A thick smear of bright blue buttercream frosting from Jamal's birthday cake was clinging to the bottom edge of the paper. Without breaking eye contact with Terrence, I calmly pressed the frosted edge of the check directly against his navy blue silk lapel and slowly dragged it down, leaving a thick, sticky blue stain right across his chest. Chloe's jaw dropped in absolute horror. She let out a high-pitched gasp, reaching out as if she could somehow undo the damage to the designer fabric. Terrence stumbled back a step, his smug smile vanishing instantly as he looked down at the ruined silk. "You are out of your mind." He snapped, his voice finally, losing that polished, condescending edge. "Do you have any idea how much this suit costs?" I let the check flutter to the grass, landing right by his expensive leather shoes. "I do not care what it costs, Terence," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "And I do not care how many millions are sitting in your wife's trust fund. You cannot buy what is not for sale. Jamal is my son. He is the boy I raised while you were out living your bachelor fantasy. You do not get to purchase him like a summer home just because your new wife cannot give you an heir." I took another step forward, backing him toward the gate. "You have exactly 10 seconds to get off my property," I told him. "If you are still standing in my yard when I count to 10, I am going to step aside and let my brother David and my uncle Cedric show you exactly how we handle trespassers in this neighborhood. And trust me, Terence, all the money in the world will not buy you a new jaw." David cracked his knuckles loudly, a sound that echoed perfectly in the quiet yard. Uncle Cedric took a heavy step forward, the heavy metal grill tongs still gripped tightly in his massive hand. Even my mother picked up a heavy glass pitcher of sweet tea from the table, looking like she was ready to launch it directly at Chloe's perfectly highlighted head. Terence looked at my family, and for the first time I saw a flicker of genuine fear in his eyes. He realized very quickly that his wealth offered him zero protection in this backyard. He smoothed down his ruined lapel with a shaking hand, trying desperately to regain his composure. "Come on, Chloe," he muttered, grabbing her arm. "We are leaving. These people are exactly as uncivilized as I remembered." Chloe scoffed, turning on her heel so fast she nearly tripped over the grass in her designer heels. "You will regret this, Maya," she spat over her shoulder. "We are trying to help you." Terence stopped just as he reached the wooden side gate. He turned back to look at me, and the fear in his eyes was replaced by a cold, calculating cruelty. He did not yell, he did not make a scene. He simply leaned slightly forward and lowered his voice so only I could hear his next words. "You think you have won because you got to play the tough, protective mother in front of your family?" He whispered, a dark smirk returning to his face. "But you are playing checkers. Maya and I am playing chess. I did not come here today to ask for your permission. I came here to give you fair warning." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, refusing to let him see the sudden spike of anxiety in my chest. "Check your phone, Maya," he said softly. "Check your business accounts. I told you I already have my lawyers working on this. I am going to squeeze you until you have absolutely nothing left to offer that boy. You will be begging me to take him by Monday morning." With that, he pulled the heavy wooden gate open and ushered Chloe through it. The gate slammed shut behind them, echoing with a finality that made my stomach drop. The silence in the yard was deafening. Slowly, the murmur of my family started up again. David rushed over to me, asking if I was okay. My mother was already picking up the dropped check with a pair of napkins, looking at the $2 million figure with wide eyes. But I could not focus on any of them. My entire attention was zeroed in on the sudden rapid buzzing coming from the front pocket of my jeans. I pulled out my phone. The screen was lit up with a barrage of urgent notifications. They were not text messages or birthday wishes for Jamal. They were automated alerts from my corporate bank. I unlocked the screen, my hands suddenly trembling. There was an email from my business banking manager marked with high importance. Right below it were 5 separate push notifications from the banking app. Alert. Account frozen. Alert. Withdrawal limit exceeded. Alert. Insufficient funds for scheduled payroll. I opened the banking app and stared at the dashboard of my catering business. The operating accounts, the payroll accounts, the emergency savings fund I had built up over the last 10 years. All of them displayed a balance of 0, with a bright red lock icon next to the account numbers. I tapped on the lock icon, and a sterile automated message popped up on the screen. "This account has been temporarily frozen due to an emergency family court injunction. Please contact your legal representative or branch manager for further details." Terence had not just come to insult me. He had used his high-priced lawyers to file a frivolous emergency motion, freezing every single dollar I used to run my business and feed my son. He knew that without my operating accounts, I could not buy supplies for the 3 massive corporate weddings I had booked this weekend. He knew I could not pay my staff. He was deliberately trying to destroy my livelihood to prove to a judge that I was financially unstable and unfit to care for Jamal. I stood there in the middle of the sunny backyard surrounded by my loving family and the joyous sounds of my son's birthday party, feeling the weight of the world crashing down on my shoulders. But as I stared at the frozen bank accounts on my screen, the shock slowly melted away, leaving behind a burning, white-hot rage. Terrence wanted a war, and he thought stripping me of my cash flow would make me surrender. He was about to learn that the woman he abandoned 10 years ago was dead, and the woman standing in her place was untouchable. Monday morning arrived with the kind of sharp clarity that only comes after a sleepless weekend. I did not spend my Sunday crying. I spent it on the phone with my legal team and my forensic accountant preparing for absolute war. By 8:15 in the morning, I was pulling my SUV into the reserved parking space outside the towering glass and steel building of my corporate bank branch downtown. I was not wearing an apron today. I was wearing a tailored charcoal suit, and my hair was pulled back into a sleek bun. I carried a thick leather briefcase containing the very documents that were going to make Terrence deeply regret ever learning my address. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and walked straight across the polished marble floor of the lobby. I bypassed the regular teller lines and headed directly for the frosted glass doors of the VIP corporate banking suite. I had a scheduled meeting with the senior branch manager to lift the ridiculous freeze Terrence had managed to place on my operating accounts. But before my hand could even touch the brass handle of the office door, a sickeningly sweet voice called out my name. Maya, sweetie, over here. I paused, taking a deep breath to steady my rising blood pressure. I turned around and saw exactly who it was. Sitting on a plush leather sofa in the VIP waiting area, legs crossed at the ankle and holding a pristine paper coffee cup, was Becky. She was a wealthy, entitled white woman who had married Terrence's older brother Jason about 7 years ago. Becky was the kind of woman who wore cashmere sweaters draped over her shoulders in the middle of summer and believed that speaking in a soft, hushed tone made her thinly veiled insults sound like genuine advice. I walked over to where she was sitting, gripping my briefcase tightly. "What are you doing here, Becky?" I asked, keeping my voice perfectly flat and professional. Becky stood up, smoothing down her designer slacks, and gave me a sympathetic smile that made my stomach turn. "I have been waiting for you, Maya," she said, sighing heavily as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. "Terrence called Jason and me yesterday. He told us about the little scene at your house. Oh, Maya, I am just so worried about you. I came here as a friend to try and talk some sense into you before you do something you will permanently regret." I stared at her. "You came to my corporate bank branch on a Monday morning to talk sense into me," I repeated. "How did you even know I banked here, Becky?" She waved her hand dismissively, her diamond tennis bracelet catching the overhead lights. "Oh, Jason still has some connections in the family court system. Getting a judge to sign an emergency injunction over the weekend was not difficult for them. And tracking down where your little food business does its banking was just a matter of making a few phone calls. But that is exactly my point, Maya. You are playing a game you do not have the resources to win." She stepped closer, lowering her voice to that conspiratorial whisper people use when they think they are doing you a massive favor. "I know you are hurt, Maya. I know Terrence leaving you was difficult, but you have to put your pride aside and think about Jamal. You are being completely selfish right now." "Selfish?" I asked, the word tasting like ash in my mouth. "Yes, selfish," Becky insisted, nodding her head as if we were agreeing on a universal truth. "You are letting your bitterness toward Terrence cloud your judgment. Chloe is offering Jamal an extraordinary life. Do you have any idea who Chloe's father is? The man is a literal billionaire. He has entire law firms on retainer, limitless resources, Maya. They can keep your bank accounts frozen in litigation for years. They can drag your name through the mud and ruin your little catering business with a single phone call." I stood perfectly still, letting her words wash over me. She really thought she was the reasonable white savior stepping in to rescue the poor, struggling black mother from her own emotional ignorance. She truly believed that my entire existence was fragile enough to be blown away by a stiff breeze from a wealthy family. Becky reached out and lightly touched my forearm. I flinched internally but did not pull away. I wanted to hear exactly how far she was willing to go. "Take the $2 million, Maya," she whispered, her eyes wide with fake sincerity. "It is more money than you have ever seen in your life. You can pay off whatever debts you have, maybe upgrade your apartment or expand your kitchen equipment. But do not fight them on custody. You cannot compete with their wealth. They are going to starve you out financially starting right now. You are standing in a bank where you cannot even access a single dollar. Do not let your stubbornness ruin the good thing they are trying to do for your boy. Jamal needs a real family with the right connections to succeed in this world. Let him go, Maya." She squeezed my arm gently, as if she had just delivered the most profound wisdom I could ever hope to receive. She stood there waiting for me to break down, waiting for me to thank her for showing me the light, waiting for me to surrender my child to a man who had treated him like garbage. My eyes flicked from her face to the glass doors of the manager's office, and then back to the lobby around us. Several other wealthy clients and bank employees were starting to glance in our direction, drawn by Becky's unmistakable tone of lecturing authority. She felt perfectly comfortable standing in the middle of a high-end financial institution, telling me that I was an inadequate mother because I did not possess a trust fund. She was banking on the assumption that I would be embarrassed by the public confrontation. She assumed that because I was a black woman facing down a wealthy white woman and a team of billionaire lawyers, I would shrink myself to avoid making a scene. She thought my silence over the past few minutes was a sign of submission. She had absolutely no idea that I was just loading my weapons. I slowly lifted my hand and removed her fingers from my sleeve, as if she had just tracked something foul into my home. I did not step back. I did not lower my eyes. I did not shrink. Instead, I consciously projected my voice using the exact same authoritative tone I used to command a kitchen of 50 catering staff during a 500-person banquet. "Limitless resources." "Becky," I asked, echoing her words clearly across the quiet marble lobby. "That is a fascinating phrase coming from you. Do you remember the year 2017? "Becky." "Because I absolutely do." I took a deliberate step toward her, forcing her to step back. The middle-aged man reading the Wall Street Journal in the corner lowered his paper. Two tellers behind the frosted glass partition stopped typing on their keyboards. The entire VIP suite was suddenly holding its collective breath. "I remember a very different version of you." I continued, my voice ringing clear as a bell. "I remember a woman sitting at my kitchen island sobbing so hard her mascara stained my granite countertops because her leased BMW was 2 days away from being repossessed." "You did not have limitless resources then, did you? You had maxed out department store credit cards and a desperate, pathetic need to look rich enough to trap Terrence's brother into putting a diamond ring on your finger." Becky visibly recoiled, her pale skin suddenly flushing a deep mottled red that clashed horribly with her expensive cashmere sweater. "Maya, keep your voice down," she hissed, her eyes darting frantically around the lobby to see who was watching. "People are listening to us." "Oh, I want them to listen," I said, smiling a cold, razor-sharp smile. "I want every single person in this bank to understand exactly who is giving me financial and maternal advice this morning. You have the unmitigated gall to stand here draped in clothes your husband bought and tell me I cannot provide for my son. Have you forgotten that I paid your car note for 3 consecutive months so you would not have to take the city bus to your country club auditions?" She opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off instantly, refusing to yield even an inch of ground. "I remember the fake designer bags you used to carry. I remember you begging me to cater Jason's 30th birthday party for free so you could take the credit and look like a devoted high society girlfriend. You sat in my house drinking my wine and cried about how the debt collectors were calling your office. You were so desperate for a lifeline That you took $5,000 of my hard-earned catering money just to keep up the illusion of wealth until the wedding day. And you never paid me back a single dime. Please, Maya, stop it. Becky whispered, her voice cracking under the weight of her sudden public exposure. You are embarrassing me. You embarrassed yourself the moment you walked into my place of business and told me to sell my child, I fired back, stepping even closer so she had to look straight into my eyes. You are standing here playing the tragic white savior, trying to convince a black mother to abandon her child for a check because you think money equals morality. You think because you married into a family that possesses a generational trust fund, you suddenly have the authority to dictate my life. The silence in the lobby was absolute. The bank manager whose office I was waiting to enter had actually opened his heavy oak door, slightly completely captivated by the scene unfolding in his waiting area. I wanted him to hear this too. I wanted every financial professional in this building to know exactly what kind of people were trying to seize my assets. You look at me, and your immediate assumption is poverty and desperation, I told her, my voice echoing off the high ceilings. You think motherhood is a transaction because your entire life has been a transaction. But you do not have any money, Becky. You have an allowance. You traded your dignity for a zip code, and now you expect me to do the same with my flesh and blood. You tell Terrence and you tell Chloe that my son is not a commodity to be traded so they can unlock a trust fund. Becky looked like a fish suffocating on dry land. The smug aristocratic aura she had walked in with was entirely shattered, leaving behind nothing but the insecure broke woman I used to feed out of pity. She clutched her pristine paper coffee cup so tightly that the plastic lid popped off, spilling hot latte all over her expensive designer slacks. She gasped, jumping back and frantically wiping at the stain, but the damage was already done. Do not ever step to me about my son again, I told her, my tone dropping to a deadly serious register. And do not ever mistake my silence for weakness. I am not a woman who cries over frozen accounts, and I am certainly not a woman who takes orders from a parasite. You can take your warnings and your limitless resources and go back to your husband. I turned my back on her, completely dismissing her existence. I looked directly at the senior branch manager, who was standing in the doorway of his office, wide-eyed and thoroughly stunned. Good morning, Mr. Henderson, I said, my voice instantly returning to a smooth, professional cadence. I believe we have a 9 o'clock appointment regarding a fraudulent freeze on my corporate accounts. Shall we go inside? He nodded quickly, stepping aside to let me pass. As I walked into his office, I heard the rapid, frantic clicking of Becky's heels as she practically ran out of the bank lobby, leaving behind a trail of spilled coffee and the shattered remains of her pride. She had come to intimidate me into submission, but all she had done was remind me exactly who I was dealing with. They were not untouchable billionaires. They were cowards hiding behind lawyers. And I was about to show this bank manager exactly why those lawyers had made a fatal mistake. I stepped into the spacious corner office of Mr. Henderson, the senior branch manager. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, instantly muting the sounds of the lobby. Mr. Henderson scurried around his massive mahogany desk, looking incredibly flustered. He gestured nervously to one of the leather guest chairs. Please have a seat, Maya, he said, adjusting his tie. I apologize for the scene out there. I had no idea Mrs. Davis was going to approach you like that. I sat down, placing my leather briefcase squarely on my lap. Let us focus on why I am actually here. Mr. Henderson, I said, keeping my posture perfectly straight. I woke up yesterday morning to find that my operating accounts, my payroll accounts, and my commercial credit lines had been completely frozen. I need you to explain to me exactly how a family court injunction managed to lock up the capital of a functioning business over the weekend. Mr. Henderson sighed heavily, opening a manila folder on his desk. Maya, you know we value your business here, but our hands are tied. We received an emergency ex parte order from a family court judge late Friday afternoon. The order is part of a high-conflict custody petition filed by Terrence Davis. His legal team claimed that you were a flight risk and requested an immediate freeze on all financial assets associated with your Social Security number to prevent you from leaving the state with your son. He pushed a copy of the court order across the desk. "It is a standard procedure in extreme custody disputes," he explained softly. "The order mandates that the bank freeze any accounts where you are listed as the primary account holder." Terrence's lawyers from the firm of Sterling and Vance were extremely aggressive. They threatened to hold the bank in contempt if we did not comply immediately. I looked down at the court order. I did not even bother picking it up. I just stared at the name printed in bold black ink at the top of the document: Maya Davis. Terrence and his high-priced lawyers had made a catastrophic assumption. Because I was a single black mother running a catering company, they assumed I was running a cute little sole proprietorship. They assumed I was just cooking out of my kitchen and depositing the checks directly into my personal savings account. They thought my business and my personal identity were one and the same. I unlatched my leather briefcase. The sharp click of the metal clasps echoed loudly in the quiet office. "Mr. Henderson," I said, pulling out a thick stack of professionally bound legal documents. "I understand that the firm of Sterling and Vance is very intimidating. I also understand that a family court judge signed an order freezing the personal assets of Maya Davis. But the accounts you froze do not belong to Maya Davis." I slid the first document across the desk right on top of Terrence's court order. I placed my index finger on the top of the page. "That is the state-issued certificate of formation for Davis Culinary Enterprises Limited Liability Company," I told him, watching his eyes dart down to the paper. "Right beneath it is the Federal Employer Identification Number issued by the IRS. My business is not a hobby, Mr. Henderson. It is a legally incorporated corporate entity. It exists completely separate from Maya Davis, the individual." Mr. Henderson frowned, leaning forward to inspect the documents. "But Maya, you are the sole owner and authorized signer on the accounts," he stammered. "Being an authorized corporate officer does not mean my personal family court disputes apply to the corporate entity." I replied, my voice sharp and unwavering. "Maya Davis is an employee of the LLC. The money in those accounts belongs to the corporation, not to me. A family court judge has absolutely no jurisdiction to freeze the operating capital of a separate commercial enterprise based on a personal custody petition." I pulled out the second document from my briefcase. This one was printed on the heavy watermarked stationery of my own corporate legal team. "What your compliance department did on Friday night was freeze the assets of a multi-million-dollar corporation without a commercial warrant," I explained, leaning forward so he could feel the full weight of my words. "You have disrupted my payroll. You have jeopardized 3 massive corporate contracts. That is textbook tortious interference with a business relationship." Mr. Henderson's face lost all its color. He suddenly realized the magnitude of the mistake the bank had made. "This is a formal letter of intent from my corporate attorney," I said, sliding the heavy paper across the desk. "It states that if the funds belonging to Davis Culinary Enterprises LLC are not completely unfrozen within the next 10 minutes, we will file a massive civil lawsuit against this bank for financial damages, breach of fiduciary duty, and unlawful seizure of corporate assets. You can tell Terrence's lawyers to take their family court order and frame it, because it is absolutely useless in a corporate banking dispute." Mr. Henderson did not say a single word. He grabbed his desk phone with shaking hands and punched in a 4-digit extension. He practically yelled at the compliance officer on the other end of the line, ordering them to pull up my corporate profiles immediately. He read off the federal tax ID numbers from my documents, his voice cracking with panic as he realized I was absolutely right. The bank had blindly followed an aggressive lawyer without properly verifying the corporate status of the accounts. Within 3 minutes, he slammed the phone back onto the receiver. He looked at me, his forehead shining with a thin layer of sweat. "It is done," he said, breathing heavily. "The freeze has been lifted entirely. Your corporate accounts are fully active. Maya, I am so incredibly sorry for this oversight. We never intended to jeopardize your business operations." I pulled my phone from my pocket and opened the banking app. The bright red lock icons were completely gone. My balances were restored. My payroll was secure. Terrence had fired his first major shot, and I had completely neutralized it before my morning coffee even got cold. I stood up, gathering my documents and placing them neatly back into my briefcase. I suggest your legal department reads their paperwork more carefully next time, Mr. Henderson, I said, snapping the briefcase shut. Have a wonderful day. I turned and walked out of the office. I strode through the bank lobby with my head held high, completely ignoring the spot where Becky had spilled her coffee just moments before. I pushed through the heavy revolving doors and stepped out into the bright morning sunlight. The downtown air felt electric. A massive wave of triumph washed over me. Terrence thought he could starve me out. He thought he could use his new wealth to bring me to my knees. But he had fundamentally underestimated the empire I had built with my own two hands. I walked briskly toward my parked SUV, feeling untouchable. I unlocked the doors and slid into the driver's seat, tossing my briefcase onto the passenger side. I reached for the ignition, ready to head to my commercial kitchen and crush the rest of my day. Then my phone started ringing. The sharp trill of the ringtone shattered the triumphant silence in the car. I picked it up, expecting to see my kitchen manager calling about the weekend supply delivery. Instead, the caller ID displayed the name and logo of the elite private academy where Jamal attended the 5th grade. A sudden cold spike of dread pierced right through my chest. The school never called the parents during first period, unless something was terribly wrong. I swiped the screen to answer, bringing the phone to my ear. "Hello," I said, my voice suddenly tight. "Miss Davis, this is Principal Evans." The voice on the other end was frantic, breathless, and strained with panic. "Miss Davis, you need to get down to the school immediately. What is wrong?" I demanded, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Is Jamal hurt?" "Jamal is safe in my office for now," Principal Evans stammered. "But your ex-husband is here. Terrence Davis just walked into the main lobby. He has 2 city police officers with him and an emergency custody order signed by a judge. He is demanding that we pull Jamal out of class and hand him over right now." The victorious feeling from the bank vanished instantly, replaced by a primal protective rage that threatened to blind me. I dropped the phone into the cup holder, slammed the car into drive, and hit the gas. My foot slammed the accelerator against the floorboard of my SUV. I wove through the downtown traffic with a reckless desperation I had never known. Every red light felt like a personal attack, and every slow-moving car was an unbearable obstacle. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. The elite brick campus of the academy was normally a 20-minute drive from my bank, but I made it in exactly 9. I threw the car into park across 2 visitor spaces right in front of the main entrance, not even bothering to lock the doors as I sprinted up the concrete steps. I pushed through the heavy double doors of the administration building, my heels clicking frantically against the polished hardwood floors. The front desk receptionist stood up quickly, her eyes wide as she tried to call out my name, but I ignored her completely. I marched straight down the quiet carpeted corridor toward the heavy frosted glass door of the principal's office and threw it open without knocking. The atmosphere inside the room was immediately suffocating. Principal Evans was standing behind his large oak desk, wringing his hands and looking completely out of his depth. Sitting in one of the plush visitor chairs was Terrence. His ruined silk suit jacket from Saturday had been replaced by an equally expensive gray tailored suit, and he looked as relaxed as if he were waiting for a tea time at his exclusive country club. Standing next to him was a tall, slender white man holding a pristine leather briefcase, and blocking the doorway to the inner private office was a uniformed city police officer with his hand resting cautiously near his utility belt. "Where is my son?" I demanded, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the room like a whip. Principal Evans stepped forward, quickly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "Jamal is safe in the school counselor's office, Maya," he said, his voice shaking slightly. "I wanted to keep him insulated from this discussion. He is drawing pictures and eating snacks. He does not know what is happening out here." "It is not a discussion," Maya Terrence said, standing up slowly and casually, buttoning his suit jacket. "It is a legal transfer of custody. You can make this easy and let the boy walk out to my car, or you can make a huge embarrassing scene and have him watch his mother get put into the back of a squad car. The choice is entirely yours." The tall man with the briefcase stepped forward and handed me a thick stack of papers stapled at the top left corner. "Ms. Davis, I am Richard Sterling, lead counsel for your ex-husband," he said, his tone perfectly smooth and completely devoid of any human empathy. "What you are holding is a temporary emergency ex parte custody order signed by Judge Harrison at 9 o'clock this morning. It grants my client immediate physical custody of your son, pending a full hearing next week." I looked down at the paperwork, but I did not take it from his outstretched hand. I let the silence hang for a moment before I looked Sterling dead in the eye. "On what grounds exactly does a judge grant an emergency order, taking a child from the only parent he has ever known without a prior hearing?" I asked, keeping my voice dangerously level. "On the grounds of severe parental neglect and an unstable home environment," Sterling replied, retracting his hand and placing the documents on the edge of the principal's desk. "We presented evidence to the court this morning that you work upwards of 80 hours a week running a high-stress catering business. We provided sworn statements claiming Jamal is frequently left in the care of various relatives and paid babysitters because his primary guardian is physically absent from the home." Sterling paused, adjusting his expensive tie before delivering the final blow. "Furthermore, we demonstrated that my client's extensive wealth and incredibly stable home life provide a vastly superior and far safer environment for the child." The judge agreed that leaving the boy in your erratic care constituted an immediate risk to his well-being and developmental future. I felt a white-hot flare of absolute fury ignite in my chest. I looked at Terrence, who was wearing a smug, satisfied smirk. The absolute hypocrisy of the situation was staggering. 10 years ago, he had emptied our joint savings accounts and abandoned us, leaving me pregnant and entirely alone. I had worked 80-hour weeks catering cheap weddings and corporate luncheons just to keep the electricity on and buy diapers. I had built an empire from scratch through pure exhaustion and relentless dedication, just so Jamal would never have to feel the sting of poverty. And now the very man who forced me into that struggle was using my incredible work ethic as a weapon to brand me an unfit mother. "You should have taken the check on Saturday," Maya Terrence sneered, taking a step toward me. "I told you I was going to squeeze you until you had nothing left. You are a negligent mother who cares more about baking cakes than raising her son. The court sees it, the police see it. Now it is over. You do not have the money or the power to fight me on this." The uniformed police officer stepped forward, his expression grim and deeply uncomfortable. He was clearly intimidated by the aggressive, high-priced lawyer and the official-looking stamp on the court document. "Mum, I understand this is highly emotional for you," he said, his voice firm but sympathetic. "I respond to these civil standoffs all the time, but my job is to enforce the orders of the court." The officer pointed a heavy finger at the papers on the desk. "That document has a judge's signature on it, making it the absolute law. If you refuse to hand the child over to his father right now, you will be in direct violation of a court order. I will have no choice but to place you under arrest for custodial interference and contempt of court. Please, Ms. Davis, do not make me put handcuffs on you in front of your son's school principal. Let the boy go with his father, and you can fight it out in court on Monday." I looked at the police officer. He was just doing his job, blindly following a piece of paper generated by a system that heavily favored the wealthy and the connected. Then I looked at Terrence. He was practically vibrating with victory. He had timed this entire ambush perfectly. He thought that by bringing a cop and a lawyer to the school, he could bully me into immediate submission. He thought that the threat of jail time would break my spirit and force me to hand over my child like a piece of luggage. He thought his sudden wealth gave him the ultimate power to dictate reality. Principal Evans looked at me with deep sorrow in his eyes. "Maya, maybe you should just comply for today," he whispered nervously. "We do not want Jamal to see you get arrested. You can call your lawyer as soon as they leave." I took a deep breath, forcing my heart rate to slow down. I did not panic. I did not scream. I did not give Terrence and his lawyer the angry, irrational reaction they were so desperately hoping to trigger so they could justify their false narrative of my emotional instability. My mind was crystal clear and completely focused on the singular goal of destroying the man standing in front of me. I reached out and picked up the thick stack of legal papers from the principal's desk. Terrence's smile grew even wider, thinking I was finally accepting defeat. Instead, I calmly flipped to the second page, scanning the legal jargon, until I found the specific clause regarding parental rights. "Officer," I said, turning my attention completely away from Terrence and focusing solely on the policeman. "You stated that your job is to enforce the law based on the legally binding documents presented to you, correct?" "Yes, Mom," the officer replied, nodding slowly, looking slightly confused by my sudden shift in demeanor. "And if a court order is based on a fraudulent premise or directly contradicts an existing ironclad legal judgment, it cannot be summarily enforced without a secondary hearing, correct?" I asked, holding his gaze. The lawyer Sterling immediately stepped forward, his face flushing with irritation. "Do not try to play lawyer, Ms. Davis," he snapped. "That is a valid emergency order signed by a sitting judge today. You are out of options." I ignored the lawyer completely, keeping my eyes fixed on the police officer. I set the judge's order back down on the desk. Then I reached for the brass latches of my leather briefcase. "Terrence thinks he holds the ultimate trump card because he bought a lawyer," I said, my voice dropping to a calm, deadly register. "But he forgot one very important detail about the history we share. He forgot exactly what he did 10 years ago to make sure he would never have to pay me a single dime of child support." I opened the briefcase and pulled out a single sheet of heavy archival paper with a raised notary seal stamped at the bottom. I did not hand it to Terrence, and I did not hand it to the lawyer. I handed it directly to the police officer. Terrence grew impatient and stepped forward, his face twisted in sudden anger. He reached past me, grabbing for the brass handle of the heavy oak door leading to the counselor's office where Jamal was waiting. I did not hesitate. I stepped directly into his path, slamming my hand flat against the wood and blocking him completely. My heart was racing, but my hands were completely steady. I looked at this man who had caused me so much grief in my 20s. He was wearing the clothes of a wealthy man, but underneath the designer fabric, he was the exact same coward who had packed his bags in the middle of the night, leaving a pregnant woman to figure out how to pay the rent. Before he could say another word or attempt to push past me, I shoved the heavy archival paper directly into the police officer's hands. "Read that carefully, officer," I said, keeping my body positioned like an absolute shield between my ex-husband and the door. "That is a voluntary and irrevocable termination of parental rights. It was signed, notarized, and filed with the state of Georgia exactly 10 years ago." The officer looked down at the paper, his brow furrowing as he read the dense legal text. He traced his finger over the raised seal of the notary public. "I had kept that document locked in a fireproof safe for 10 years. It was my ultimate insurance policy against the man who had abandoned us." Terrence scoffed, waving his hand dismissively. "That is ancient history, Maya. I am his biological father, and I have a court order from today." I turned my head to look at Terrence, my expression radiating pure disgust. "Biology does not make you a father, Terrence," I said coldly. "And you gave up your legal rights the moment you realized an infant was going to interfere with your little gold-digging campaign." I looked back at the police officer and the school principal, making sure they heard every single word of the truth. 10 years ago, Terrence was desperate, I explained, my voice echoing in the quiet office. He had just met Chloe and her billionaire family. He was trying to play the part of a successful, unencumbered bachelor. When I got pregnant, he panicked. He knew that if Chloe found out he was expecting a child with his soon-to-be ex-wife, she would drop him instantly. And more importantly, he knew he could not afford to pay me court-ordered child support while trying to maintain the illusion of wealth to impress her father. So he made me a deal. I continued pointing at the document in the officer's hands. He voluntarily surrendered all of his parental rights to Jamal forever, in exchange for me agreeing not to pursue him for a single dime of child support or alimony. He signed away his own flesh and blood so he could buy expensive suits and pretend he did not have a family. He traded his son for a chance to play a rich bachelor. Legally speaking, officer, the man standing next to you is nothing more than a complete stranger to my son. The police officer finished reading the document. He looked at the raised notary seal and the official state filing stamp. Then he looked at the emergency custody order he was holding in his other hand. The color drained from his face as he realized the massive legal error he had almost committed by blindly following the lawyer's instructions. "Mr. Sterling," the officer said, turning to the high-priced lawyer. "This document clearly states your client terminated his parental rights a decade ago. A man who has no legal parental rights cannot petition for an emergency ex parte custody order without first having those rights legally reinstated by a superior court judge." Richard Sterling looked incredibly uncomfortable. He shifted his weight, adjusting his grip on his pristine leather briefcase. He had clearly been kept in the dark about this document. Terrence had lied to his own legal counsel, conveniently omitting the fact that he was legally a stranger to the child he was trying to claim. Sterling knew that presenting a judge with a custody petition while hiding a termination of parental rights was a massive ethical violation. It could jeopardize his law license, and he was absolutely not going to risk his career for Terrence's lies. The lawyer opened his mouth to argue out of pure reflex, but the officer held up a stern hand, cutting him off completely. "Do not try to legally maneuver me, counselor," the officer warned, his voice hardening with professional authority. "If I enforce this emergency order and take that child from his legal guardian, based on a petition from a man with zero parental rights, that is textbook kidnapping. I am not losing my badge and facing federal charges because you failed to disclose a prior termination agreement to the judge this morning." The officer took a deliberate step back, effectively removing himself from Terrence's side and distancing himself from the liability. "As far as the city police are concerned, this is a civil matter, and this custody order is currently unenforceable. I suggest you take this up in family court on Monday. I am leaving." Terrence stared at the officer in absolute shock. "Wait, you cannot just walk out," he demanded, his polished facade cracking wide open. "I have a court order. I am taking my son today. If you attempt to forcibly remove that child from this building without a reinstated legal right, I will personally arrest you for attempted abduction," the officer stated firmly, leaving no room for negotiation. "Have a good day, Ms. Davis." The officer turned on his heel and walked out of the principal's office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him. The shift in power in the room was instantaneous and incredibly satisfying. Terrence and his lawyer were left standing in the middle of the office, entirely stripped of the police intimidation tactic they had relied on to bully me into submission. Principal Evans let out a massive sigh of relief and stepped out from behind his desk. "Mr. Davis," the principal said, his voice finally regaining its usual administrative authority, "since the police officer has declared your order unenforceable, and Ms. Davis holds sole legal custody, I am going to have to ask you to leave the campus immediately. If you refuse, I will call school security and have you escorted out for trespassing." Terrence clenched his jaw so tightly I could see a muscle twitching violently near his ear. He glared at me, his eyes filled with a venomous, helpless rage. He had walked into this school expecting an easy victory. He expected me to cower and cry and hand over my son out of pure fear. Instead, I had humiliated him in front of law enforcement, exposed his lies to his own attorney, and completely dismantled his aggressive ambush with a single piece of paper. I stood my ground, holding my head high, and refused to break eye contact. "You really thought I would not keep the receipts?" "Terrence," I asked softly, my voice dripping with absolute contempt. "You thought you could just rewrite history because you married into a bank account. You threw us away when we were inconvenient, and now you want to steal my son just to secure your own inheritance in a trust fund. It is pathetic. Get out of my son's school and do not ever come back." But Terrence did not turn toward the door. Instead, he let out a slow, dark chuckle that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. He looked over at his lawyer, who was already recovering from the shock of the police officer's departure. Richard Sterling smoothed the lapels of his expensive suit and reached back into his pristine leather briefcase. "You are very dramatic, Ms. Davis," the lawyer said, his voice regaining its cold, clinical edge. "But you are also fundamentally misunderstanding the legal reality of your situation. That piece of paper you just handed the officer might have stopped a street cop from executing a temporary physical order today, but it will absolutely not stop a superior court judge on Monday." Sterling pulled out another stack of freshly printed legal documents and dropped them onto the principal's desk, right next to the now useless emergency custody order. "We fully anticipated that you might try to hide behind that outdated termination agreement," Sterling explained smoothly. "That is exactly why my firm filed a secondary motion this morning, immediately after securing the temporary custody order. We are petitioning the court to completely void that termination document on the grounds of extreme financial duress, fraud, and coercion." "Coercion?" I repeated, staring at the lawyer in absolute disbelief. "He abandoned me. He begged to sign that paper so he could go play rich bachelor with his mistress without paying child support." "That is your narrative," Sterling replied, completely unfazed by the truth. "Our narrative, backed by sworn affidavits, is that you threatened to ruin his startup company and his professional reputation if he did not sign his rights away. We are arguing that he signed it under severe emotional distress because you weaponized his unborn child against him. A family court judge is going to look at that 10-year-old document and see a bitter ex-wife who illegally blackmailed a young father out of his child's life." The sheer audacity of the lie literally took my breath away. They were completely rewriting history. They were painting Terrence as the helpless victim and me as the manipulative extortionist. Terrence stepped closer, leaning in so his face was just inches from mine. "Did you really think you could outsmart me, Maya?" he asked, his voice dripping with intense condescension. "I told you I am playing chess. I have a team of the most ruthless family law attorneys in the entire state of Georgia. They are going to drag you into a courtroom on Monday morning and tear your life apart piece by piece. They are going to make you look like an unstable, vindictive woman who alienated a loving father from his only son." I did not flinch or step back. "You can lie to a judge all you want, Terrence," I fired back, my tone unwavering. "But I have the resources to fight you. My business is fully operational, and my accounts are completely unfrozen. Your little bank stunt failed. I will hire my own legal team, and I will bury you in so much litigation, you will wish you never remembered my name." Terrence's dark smirk widened into a full-blown wicked grin. He looked incredibly satisfied. "Oh, Maya," he practically purred. "You really think you still have a business to protect?" A cold knot formed instantly in the pit of my stomach. "What are you talking about?" I demanded, refusing to let my voice shake. Terrence casually checked the heavy gold watch on his wrist. "It is about 10:30 on a Monday morning," he mused aloud. "Which means the event coordinators for the Regional Tech Conference, the City Hospital Charity Gala, and the Downtown Real Estate Mixer have probably already called your kitchen manager." The blood drained rapidly from my face. Those were my top 3 corporate catering contracts for the entire quarter. They were massive multi-day events that required weeks of meticulous preparation, and they represented nearly 60% of my projected revenue for the season. Terrence saw the realization hit me, and his eyes danced with cruel delight. "Chloe's father is a very powerful man in this city, Maya. He sits on the board of directors for half the charities and tech firms in the state. All it took was 3 phone calls from his office this morning. He simply suggested to those event coordinators that doing business with your catering company might be a massive conflict of interest for his future financial investments." Terrence leaned back, crossing his arms over his chest. "And just like that, your 3 biggest clients canceled their contracts effective immediately. They are pulling their deposits as we speak. You have thousands of dollars in perishable food sitting in your commercial refrigerators right now, and absolutely no one to sell it to." "You are trying to bankrupt me," I whispered, the full scope of his malicious strategy finally coming into sharp focus. He was not just trying to take Jamal. He was trying to completely destroy my ability to fight back. I am simply showing the court that you are financially unstable, Terrence corrected smoothly, adjusting his cuffs. By the time the official custody hearing begins on Monday morning, your little catering empire will be hemorrhaging money. You will not even be able to afford a decent lawyer, let alone fund a prolonged legal battle against a billionaire trust fund. You are going to walk into that courtroom broke, desperate, and completely alone. And when the judge looks at your failing business and then looks at the massive wealth and stability I can provide Jamal, they are going to hand my son over to me without a second thought. Terrence turned to his lawyer. Let us go, Richard. We have done everything we needed to do here today. He looked back at me one last time, his eyes cold and completely devoid of any human empathy. Enjoy your weekend, Maya. Spend some quality time with the boy, because come Monday, I am taking him home with me. Terrence and the lawyer walked out of the office, leaving me standing in a heavy, suffocating silence. Principal Evans looked at me with deep concern, but I could not even speak to him. My hands were shaking as I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed the direct line to my commercial kitchen. My kitchen manager answered on the first ring, her voice frantic and breathless. Maya, thank God you are calling, she practically yelled into the receiver. Everything is falling apart down here. The tech conference just canceled. The hospital gala pulled out 10 minutes ago. We have 30 pounds of prime rib in the ovens and nowhere to send it. What is going on? Cancel the prep, I told her, my voice hollow and robotic. Tell the staff to pack up the perishables and donate them to the downtown family shelter. We have lost the contracts. I hung up the phone, staring blankly at the wall of the principal's office. Terrence had successfully executed a massive financial hit against my business. But as the initial shock began to wear off, a terrifying realization crept into the back of my mind, chilling me to the bone. Those 3 corporate contracts were strictly confidential. I had not publicly announced them yet. The event dates, the client names, the deposit amounts. That information was locked inside my private office computer at my house. Terrence had abandoned me 10 years ago. He knew absolutely nothing about the day-to-day operations of my catering business. Chloe and her billionaire father could make the phone calls to cancel the contracts, but they had to know exactly who to call in the first place. There was only one way Terrence could have known exactly which clients to target to cause the maximum financial damage. He had an informant, someone who had physical access to my home office, my private files, and my closely guarded client list. Someone I trusted implicitly had sold me out to the man trying to steal my son. I left the private school campus and drove back to my house in a state of absolute hyper-focus. The panic that Terrence and his high-priced lawyer had tried to instill in me had completely burned away. It was replaced by a cold, calculating clarity. I pulled into my driveway and walked straight through the front door, bypassing the kitchen and heading directly down the hall to my home office. I needed to see the financial damage for myself. I sat down at my heavy mahogany desk and woke up my computer monitor. My email inbox was an absolute battlefield. There were 3 official cancellation notices sitting at the very top of the screen: the Regional Tech Conference, the City Hospital Charity Gala, and the Downtown Real Estate Mixer. All 3 emails used the exact same sterile corporate language, citing sudden unforeseen restructuring as the reason for pulling their catering contracts. They were even willing to forfeit their massive initial deposits just to sever ties with Davis Culinary Enterprises immediately. I opened my financial spreadsheet and ran the numbers. Losing those 3 specific events wiped out nearly 60% of my projected revenue for the entire quarter. It was a massive financial hemorrhage. Chloe and her billionaire father had executed a perfectly synchronized strike designed to cripple my cash flow right before the official custody hearing on Monday. Terrence wanted me walking into that courtroom looking completely broke, desperate, and incapable of providing for Jamal. But as I stared at the glowing screen, the terrifying thought that had formed in the principal's office returned with absolute certainty. Terrence could not have orchestrated this attack blind. I run a highly private catering company. I do not advertise my exclusive corporate client list on social media or on my public website. My banking details the exact branch where I hold my corporate accounts, the specific names and direct phone lines of the event coordinators I was working with. That was all strictly confidential internal information. Terrence had known exactly which bank branch to target with his fraudulent court order on Friday afternoon. He had known exactly which 3 corporate clients would cause the maximum financial damage if they canceled on Monday morning. He had precise targeted intelligence. I looked around my home office. The heavy metal filing cabinets were locked, but the keys were kept in an unassigned ceramic bowl on the kitchen counter. My laptop was password protected, but my family knew the passcode in case of emergencies when they helped me manage my schedule or watch Jamal. I had spent the last 10 years building a massive protective fortress to secure my son and my business from the outside world. But a fortress cannot protect you if the enemy is already sitting inside the walls. Somebody had been in this room. Somebody had either copied my hard drive or gone through my physical paper files. The realization tasted like pure poison. I had fought so hard to keep my circle small and fiercely loyal. I had paid my brother's mortgage when he was laid off. I had funded my cousin Kevin's college tuition. I had catered every single family event for free just to show my gratitude for their support during my darkest days. To think that someone I loved, someone I had fed and protected, had handed Terrence the ammunition to destroy me was a betrayal so deep it momentarily took my breath away. But I refused to let the heartbreak slow me down. I had an empire to protect and a son to keep safe. The time for blind family loyalty was over. It was time to find the Judas. Because I worked exclusively from my home office, the only people who had unfettered, unmonitored access to this house were my own flesh and blood. I picked up my phone and opened the main family group chat. I did not explain the situation. I did not mention Terrence, the canceled contracts, or the ambush at the private school. I simply typed a single demanding message. Emergency family meeting at my house right now. Drop whatever you are doing and get here immediately. I hit send and tossed the phone onto the desk. Then I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a tall glass of ice water, waiting for the trap to spring. Within 45 minutes, my driveway was completely full of cars. My older brother David was the first to arrive, pushing through the front door, still wearing his heavy work boots and an anxious expression. Uncle Cedric and Aunt Valerie showed up shortly after, looking deeply concerned. My mother arrived next, carrying a casserole dish she had been preparing when my message came through. And finally, my cousin Kevin walked through the door, looking slightly out of breath and actively avoiding eye contact. Kevin was a freelance graphic designer who frequently worked from my kitchen island when the internet at his apartment was acting up. He had spent practically every single afternoon at my house for the past 3 weeks, claiming he needed a quiet space to focus on his digital projects. They all gathered in my spacious living room, taking seats on the leather sofas and armchairs. The mood was incredibly tense. They all knew about the explosive confrontation at the cookout on Saturday, and they could clearly see the grim, unyielding expression on my face. David stood near the fireplace and asked me if Terrence had tried something else. I did not answer him immediately. Instead, I walked over to the heavy oak front door. I pushed the brass deadbolt, sliding it firmly into place, with a loud, echoing, metallic click. Then I walked over to the sliding glass door, leading to the backyard patio, and locked that one too. I pulled the heavy blackout curtains closed, plunging the bright living room into a dim, serious shadow. The casual, supportive atmosphere vanished entirely, replaced by the suffocating weight of an interrogation room. I turned around and faced my family. These were the people who had supported me when Terrence left me with nothing. These were the people I trusted with my life, my business, and my child. I looked at each of their faces, taking in their confusion, their worry, and in one particular case, their hidden guilt. "We have a massive problem," I said, my voice dangerously quiet and absolutely void of emotion. "Terrence just executed a precision attack on my business and my corporate bank accounts. He knew exact numbers, client names, and legal structures that are not public record. And the only way he could have obtained that incredibly sensitive information is if somebody sitting in this very room sold me out to him." The immediate reaction in the room was exactly what I expected: pure, Absolute denial. My mother gasped, pressing a hand to her chest as if she had been physically struck. Uncle Cedric frowned, his thick eyebrows pulling together in deep confusion. My brother David immediately stepped forward, his protective instincts flaring up. "What the hell are you talking about?" "Maya," David demanded, his voice loud and defensive. "Nobody in this room would ever stab you in the back. We hate Terrence. We were all ready to drag him out of your yard by his neck on Saturday. You are just stressed out and panicking." "I am not panicking, David," I replied, my voice remaining perfectly level and dangerously calm. "I do not panic. I calculate. And the calculations do not leave room for any other explanation." I paced slowly across the living room carpet, making sure I had everyone's complete attention. "The 3 corporate contracts that were canceled this morning were finalized last Tuesday afternoon," I explained. "I did not print hard copies. I saved the digital contracts directly to my encrypted desktop hard drive at exactly 4 o'clock on Tuesday. By Friday morning, Terrence and his lawyers were already filing emergency injunctions at my specific corporate bank branch. They knew exactly how much capital I had, and they knew exactly who to call to cut off my revenue." I stopped pacing and turned to face them. "That means whoever stole my files did it on Wednesday or Thursday of last week. They did not break in through a window. There was no forced entry. Whoever did this walked right through my front door. So let us review exactly where everyone in this room was during that specific 48-hour window." The room went dead silent. The suffocating weight of my words finally began to sink in as they realized I was not making a wild accusation. I was presenting a forensic timeline. "Mom," I said, looking at her, "you were at your church choir retreat in Savannah from Tuesday night until Friday afternoon. You could not have done it." My mother nodded quickly, her eyes wide with mounting horror. "David, you were working a mandatory double shift at the manufacturing plant all week." I continued, turning to my brother. "You did not even come over here until the cookout on Saturday, and Uncle Cedric, you and Aunt Valerie were in Florida visiting your sister." "That is right." Cedric rumbled, his voice dark and suspicious. "We did not get back to Atlanta until Friday night." I let the silence hang in the dim living room for a long, agonizing moment. I looked at the faces of my mother, my brother, and my aunt and uncle. They were all cleared, which left exactly one person sitting on the leather armchair near the window. I slowly turned my head and locked eyes with my cousin Kevin. Kevin was sweating. A thin sheen of moisture was glistening on his forehead, and his hands were gripping the armrests of his chair so tightly his knuckles were completely white. He had not said a single word since I locked the front door. Which leaves exactly one person who was inside this house. I said, my voice dropping to a surgical whisper. One person who was sitting at my kitchen island just 10 feet away from my office door all day Wednesday and all day Thursday. Kevin swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously. "Maya, I do not know what you are talking about," he stammered, his voice thin and trembling. "I was just working on my graphic design portfolio. You know the Wi-Fi at my apartment has been terrible." "Is the Wi-Fi really that bad, Kevin?" I asked, taking a slow, deliberate step toward him. "Or did you just need a convenient excuse to be inside my house while I was busy in the commercial kitchen downtown?" "I did not go into your office." "Maya," Kevin pleaded, looking frantically around the room for support. "I swear I did not." I took another step closer, towering over him as he sat frozen in the chair. "Do not lie to me, Kevin. Not right now." I remember Thursday morning very clearly. I was rushing to get Jamal ready for school. You asked me for the computer passcode because you said you desperately needed to print a resume for a job interview and your printer was out of ink. I gave you the passcode because I trusted you. Because I paid your college tuition when your parents could not afford it. Did you just print your resume, Kevin? Or did you plug a flash drive into my computer while I was walking Jamal out to the school bus? The color completely drained from Kevin's face. He looked like he was about to be physically sick. David caught on immediately. The protective older brother dynamic shifted instantly into absolute rage. David walked across the room and stood right next to me, towering over the armchair and physically blocking any chance Kevin had of making a run for the locked front door. "Answer your cousin?" David growled, his voice vibrating with a deep, menacing threat. "Did you sell my sister out to that piece of garbage?" Kevin looked at David and then back at me. His lower lip started to tremble. He tried to speak, but only a pathetic squeak came out. He brought his hands up and covered his face, and then he completely broke. Kevin started sobbing, loud, ugly, gasping sobs that echoed off the walls of the living room. He curled into himself, shrinking down in the leather chair like a terrified child. "I am sorry, Maya," he wailed, his voice muffled behind his hands. "I am so sorry. I did not know they were going to do all this. I swear to God, I did not know they were going to try and take Jamal." My mother let out a sharp cry of absolute heartbreak, falling back against the sofa. Uncle Cedric cursed loudly, turning away in pure disgust. But I did not react. I just stared down at the young man I had practically helped raise, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating emptiness. "Who paid you?" I demanded, ignoring his tears completely. "Terrence does not have the brains to orchestrate a corporate data breach. Who approached you, Kevin?" Kevin wiped his wet face with his sleeve, his eyes red and swollen. "It was Becky," he confessed, his voice shaking violently. "She sent me a direct message on Instagram 2 weeks ago. She asked to meet me for coffee." Becky. I repeated the name, tasting like venom on my tongue. The wealthy, entitled white sister-in-law who had tried to lecture me in the bank lobby just hours ago. She was the architect behind the breach. "What exactly did she say to you?" I asked, keeping the pressure firmly applied. "She told me Terrence was worried about Jamal." Kevin babbled, the words spilling out of him in a desperate rush to explain himself. "She said they just wanted to make sure you were financially stable. She told me Terrence was actually trying to set up a trust fund for Jamal, but he needed to know the exact status of your corporate accounts to structure the tax documents. She said you were too proud to share the information voluntarily. And you believe that garbage," David shouted, slamming his hand against the wall. "You believe that entitled woman over your own blood." "She offered me $50,000, Kevin cried out, looking up at David with pathetic, pleading eyes. "Do you have any idea how much debt I am in, David? My student loans are crushing me. I'm going to be evicted next month." Becky handed me an envelope with $10,000 in cash right there at the coffee shop. She gave me a little USB drive. She said all I had to do was plug it into your computer for 3 minutes and it would automatically copy your financial spreadsheets. She promised me 40,000 more once she verified the files. She swore to me it was just to help Jamal. I stood perfectly still, letting the magnitude of his betrayal wash over the room. He had sold my entire life, my business, my security, and my son for $50,000. He had handed my enemies the exact weapons they needed to destroy me, and he did it so he could pay off his rent and his student loans. He let a woman who used to beg me for car payments manipulate him into committing corporate espionage against his own family. "Get out of my house," David roared, grabbing Kevin by the collar of his shirt and physically hauling him out of the armchair. "I am going to kill you. I am going to throw you through the front window." "David, stop!" I commanded, my voice cracking through the room like a gunshot. David froze, holding a terrified Kevin suspended halfway in the air. He looked at me, his eyes burning with rage. "Maya, he sold you to Terrence. We need to throw him out on the street." I looked at my weeping, pathetic cousin. Throwing him out would be the emotional reaction. It would be the satisfying, immediate revenge. But Terrence had already taught me that the most dangerous moves are the ones you do not see coming. Kevin was not just a traitor anymore. He was a direct line of communication to the very people trying to ruin my life. "Put him back in the chair, David," I said, my mind already racing 10 steps ahead. "I am not throwing him out. We are going to use him." David slowly lowered Kevin back into the leather armchair, his massive hands still gripping the fabric of Kevin's shirt. He looked at me as if I had suddenly started speaking a foreign language. Use him? David asked, his voice thick with confusion and lingering rage. Maya, he just handed your entire life over to the people trying to steal your son. We cannot trust a single word that comes out of his mouth. He is a liability. He is only a liability if we cut him loose, I explained, keeping my eyes locked on Kevin's terrified face. If we throw him out right now, he is going to run straight to Becky to collect the rest of his blood money. He will tell them that we found out about the data breach. Terrence will know that his element of surprise is gone, and his lawyers will pivot to a new strategy before the hearing on Monday. We cannot let them change their game plan. We need them to walk into that courtroom incredibly overconfident and completely blind. I walked over to Kevin and held out my hand. Give me your phone, Kevin, I demanded, my voice leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. Kevin fumbled in his pockets, his hands shaking violently, and dropped his smartphone directly into my palm. I demanded the passcode and he gave it to me instantly. I unlocked the screen and opened his messages. It did not take long to find the encrypted chat thread with a burner number that I immediately recognized as Becky's arrogant texting style. The messages were sickening to read. She referred to my home as a chaotic environment and called my business a cute little hustle that was doomed to fail. Kevin had agreed with her just to secure his payout. Sit up straight, I snapped at Kevin, my patience completely exhausted. You are going to message her right now. You are going to tell her that I was so panicked by the canceled contracts this morning that I left my office unlocked. You are going to tell her you managed to access my deepest financial files, the ones I supposedly keep hidden from the bank. Kevin nodded frantically, wiping his nose with the back of his hand. Whatever you want, Maya. I will do whatever you say. I walked over to my mahogany desk and sat down in my leather office chair. I woke up my computer monitor and opened a blank spreadsheet. Over the next 2 hours, the entire family sat in the living room in complete silence while I fabricated the most flawless financial disaster ever put to paper. I have a degree in business management and a decade of experience running a highly profitable corporation. I know exactly what a thriving business looks like, and more importantly, I know exactly what a dying business looks like. I doctored up profit and loss statements showing massive, insurmountable debt. I created spreadsheets that demonstrated skyrocketing supply costs, combined with plummeting revenue. I forged a highly realistic notice of default on the commercial lease for my downtown kitchen facilities, making it look like my landlord was threatening immediate eviction. I manipulated my credit reports to show that every single corporate line of credit I possessed was completely maxed out and severely past due. I made it look like the loss of those 3 corporate clients this morning was the final fatal blow to my company. On paper, I made Maya Davis look like a desperate, bankrupt failure who was weeks away from being out on the street. When the fake documents were absolutely perfect, I compressed them into a secure zip file and transferred them to Kevin's phone. Send it to her. I ordered, tossing the phone back into Kevin's lap. Tell her this is the Holy Grail. Tell her Terrence can use this in family court on Monday to prove I cannot afford to provide Jamal with basic housing or food. Kevin typed the message with trembling fingers, attached the zip file, and hit send. We sat in the dim living room watching the screen of his phone. 3 minutes later, 3 digital dots appeared indicating Becky was typing a reply. The message popped up on the screen. Oh my God, Kevin, this is brilliant. Terrence is going to be thrilled. This is the final nail in her coffin. The judge will have no choice but to grant us full physical custody on Monday morning. You have saved Jamal's life. I will wire the remaining $40,000 to your account the second the judge bangs the gavel. Kevin looked up at me, tears welling in his eyes again. She bought it, he whispered. I looked at David, who was standing by the fireplace with his arms crossed over his chest. David, I want you to take Kevin to his apartment, watch him pack a bag. Then you are going to take him to your house and put him in your spare bedroom. You are going to take his phone, his laptop, and his car keys. Kevin is not leaving your sight, and he is not speaking to another living soul until the court hearing is over on Monday afternoon. David nodded, a grim smile finally appearing on his face. Consider it done. He is not going to see daylight until you say so. David grabbed Kevin by the arm and hauled him toward the front door. My mother and my aunt and uncle followed closely behind them, still deeply shaken by the betrayal but entirely focused on the mission ahead. Within 5 minutes, the house was completely empty, the heavy front door locked behind them, leaving me standing alone in the quiet shadows of my home. The trap was successfully set. Terrence and his high-priced legal team were going to march into family court, waving those fake documents like a victory flag. They were going to stand in front of a judge and proudly declare that I was a destitute failure. They were going to bet their entire custody petition on the illusion that I had absolutely nothing to my name. I turned away from my computer desk and walked across the office toward the large abstract painting hanging on the far wall. I reached behind the heavy wooden frame and flipped a hidden latch. The painting swung open on silent hinges, revealing a sleek biometric steel safe embedded directly into the drywall. I pressed my right thumb against the glowing scanner. The system chimed softly, and the heavy metal door clicked open. I reached past the stacks of emergency cash reserves and the velvet boxes containing my personal jewelry. I pulled out a thick black leather binder. This was my true financial portfolio. This was the empire I had built in absolute silence over the last 10 years. Not even my mother or my brother knew the full extent of the wealth contained inside this binder. I carried the heavy leather book back to my desk and laid it flat under the warm glow of my desk lamp. I flipped past the franchise agreements for my 7 catering locations. I turned the pages past my massive mutual fund investments and my diversified stock holdings. I stopped when I reached a heavily reinforced tab labeled Commercial Real Estate. I opened the section and pulled out a heavy watermarked property deed. I ran my index finger over the gold foil seal of the city stamped at the bottom of the page. It was the absolute and uncontested ownership deed to a 30-story commercial high-rise building located right in the very center of the downtown corporate business district. I stared at the document, a slow, ruthless smile spreading across my face in the quiet room. Terrence thought he was incredibly powerful because he carried the title of Chief Executive Officer at a flashy new tech startup. He thought he could bully me because he drove a European sports car and wore custom Italian suits. But what Terrence did not know, what his arrogant legal team never even bothered to research, was the true identity of the anonymous real estate holding group that owned the very building his company operated out of. Terrence was trying to use a judge to evict me from my role as a mother. He had absolutely no idea that I was his literal landlord. And according to my property manager, Terrence's tech startup was currently 6 months behind on their rent. Monday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky, but my mind was sharper than a scalpel. I walked through the heavy oak doors of the county family courthouse wearing a tailored emerald green suit that commanded absolute respect in any boardroom. Walking beside me was my attorney, Mr. Caldwell, a seasoned and brilliant litigator who knew exactly what we were about to execute. I carried the heavy black leather binder holding my true financial empire safely tucked inside my briefcase. I was not walking into a slaughter. I was walking into an ambush of my own design. We entered courtroom number 4, and the air was immediately sterile and cold. Sitting at the petitioner's table on the right side of the aisle was the unholy trinity of my current nightmare. Terrence was wearing another custom Italian suit, looking incredibly smug and relaxed as if he were waiting for a valet to bring his car around. Next to him sat Chloe, dressed in a conservative but clearly expensive designer dress, meant to make her look like the perfect wealthy stepmother. And sitting directly behind them in the first row of the gallery was Becky. She was leaning forward, whispering eagerly into Chloe's ear, her eyes darting toward me with a look of vicious, unfiltered triumph. They truly believed they had already won. They thought the fake documents Kevin sent them were the silver bullet that was going to end my life as a mother today. The bailiff called the courtroom to order, and Judge Harrison took his seat at the bench. He was an older man with a stern, deeply lined face, who did not look like he tolerated any theatrical nonsense in his courtroom. He briefly reviewed the docket, adjusted his glasses, and looked down at the two tables. Richard Sterling Terrence's high-priced lawyer stood up immediately, adjusting his silk tie. He walked to the center podium carrying a thick stack of papers. They were the very same zip file contents I had carefully fabricated in my living room 48 hours ago. Your Honor, Sterling began, his voice echoing with polished theatrical concern. We are here today on an emergency petition to transfer primary physical custody of the minor child Jamal Davis to his biological father. We are filing this motion because the child's current living situation is not just unstable, it is actively deteriorating into complete financial ruin. Sterling paced slowly in front of the judge's bench, putting on the performance of a lifetime. He spent the first few minutes claiming that I was a bitter, vindictive woman who had forced Terrence to sign away his rights 10 years ago using relentless emotional extortion. But he quickly pivoted from the past to the present, zeroing in on my supposed bankruptcy. He knew that family courts heavily weighed financial stability when determining the best interest of a child. Your Honor, my client simply wants to rescue his son from a life of poverty and impending homelessness. Sterling continued, his tone dripping with fake sympathy. We have obtained financial records from Ms. Davis' catering business. The picture they paint is absolutely tragic. Sterling handed a copy of my forged spreadsheets to the bailiff, who passed them up to the judge. Judge Harrison put on his reading glasses and began to scan the pages. His brow furrowed instantly as he looked at the massive red deficits I had intentionally created. As you can see, Your Honor, Ms. Davis is drowning in insurmountable commercial debt. Sterling stated, his voice rising with dramatic flair to ensure everyone in the gallery could hear him. Her supply costs have skyrocketed out of control. Her revenue has completely flatlined. Just this past Friday, her 3 largest corporate clients terminated their contracts, effective immediately, wiping out over half of her projected income for the entire year. She is quite literally out of business. But that is not even the most alarming part, Sterling added, pointing a dramatic finger at the paperwork in the judge's hands. Please direct your attention to page 4, Your Honor. That is a notice of default from her commercial landlord. Ms. Davis is months behind on the rent for her kitchen facilities. She is facing immediate eviction. All of her corporate credit lines are completely maxed out and severely past due. She does not have the capital to keep her business running, and she certainly does not have the financial stability to provide a safe, secure home for a growing 10-year-old boy. Sterling turned and gestured expansively toward Terrence and Chloe. Contrast that tragic situation with the environment my client can provide. Mr. Davis is the chief executive officer of a highly successful technology firm. His wife Chloe is the beneficiary of a generational family trust. They live in a gated estate in one of the safest, most exclusive neighborhoods in the state. They can offer this child private schooling, an elite support system, and a life entirely free from the crushing daily anxiety of poverty. It is the fundamental duty of this court to act in the best interest of the child. And leaving him in the care of a destitute mother who is weeks away from the street is a gross dereliction of that duty. The courtroom was dead silent when Sterling finished his opening statement. He walked back to his table looking incredibly satisfied with himself. Terrence reached over and patted Sterling's shoulder, a wide, arrogant smile plastered across his face. Chloe dabbed at the corner of her perfectly dry eye with a tissue, putting on a pathetic show of fake sympathy for my supposed downfall. Behind them in the gallery, Becky was literally beaming. She looked at me and gave a tiny, patronizing wave of her fingers, absolutely convinced that her $50,000 bribe to Kevin had just secured their ultimate victory. Judge Harrison looked up from the forged documents. He took off his glasses and looked down at me, his expression filled with a mixture of pity and severe concern. Ms. Davis, the judge, said, his voice grave and heavy. These financial records are incredibly troubling. If your business is truly facing this level of catastrophic debt, I have serious concerns about your ability to maintain a stable household for your son. The court cannot allow a child to be subjected to the trauma of eviction and extreme financial distress if a vastly superior alternative is readily available. Mr. Caldwell shifted in his leather chair next to me, ready to stand up and object to the illegally obtained documents. He was prepared to argue that the files were stolen and inadmissible, but I placed a firm hand on his forearm, stopping him completely. I did not want him to object. I wanted Terrence to commit perjury on the official court record. I wanted him to build his entire house of cards as high as it could possibly go before I kicked the foundation out from under him. I sat there in my emerald suit, keeping my posture perfectly straight and my face completely blank. I let the judge look at me with pity. I let Terrence look at me with arrogant triumph. I let Becky smirk from the gallery, thinking she had outsmarted a black woman from Atlanta just because she had a wealthy husband. I let them all believe that Maya Davis was broken, desperate, and backed into a corner with absolutely no way out. They were completely unaware that the trap they thought they had sprung on me was actually the cage I had built for them. Richard Sterling smoothly turned away from the judge's bench and called his next witness to the stand. Chloe gracefully stood up from the petitioner's table, smoothing the skirt of her conservative designer dress. She walked toward the witness box, with the practiced elegance of a woman who had spent her entire life walking on marble floors and country club greens. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and sat down, adjusting the microphone with a delicate manicured hand. Sterling approached the stand, his demeanor shifting from the aggressive bulldog he was moments ago to a gentle, sympathetic counselor. "Mrs. Davis," he began softly, "could you please explain to the court why you and your husband are seeking full physical custody of Jamal today?" Chloe took a deep, trembling breath. She looked down at her hands for a moment before looking up at the judge. Her eyes were already glistening with perfectly manufactured tears. "Your Honor," she said, her voice carrying a fragile emotional tremor that belonged in a Hollywood drama. "A few months ago, I received devastating news from my medical team. I was diagnosed with a condition that makes it medically impossible for me to ever carry a child. It broke my heart. All I have ever wanted was to be a mother." She paused, bringing a pristine white tissue to the corner of her eye, being careful not to smudge her expensive makeup. "When Terrence told me about Jamal, my heart just opened up completely." She continued, weaving a massive lie right in front of my face. "Terrence had never mentioned Jamal to her voluntarily. He had hidden my son like a dirty secret until her infertility forced him to find a biological heir. But in this courtroom, she was spinning it as a beautiful blended family fairy tale." Sterling nodded encouragingly. "And what kind of life are you prepared to offer the boy if the court grants custody today?" he asked. Chloe sat up a little straighter, her voice gaining strength as she transitioned from the grieving, infertile wife to the wealthy savior. "We are prepared to give him the absolute world, Your Honor. We live in a 10,000 square foot estate in the northern suburbs. Jamal would have his own private suite of rooms overlooking the gardens. My family trust has already established a comprehensive educational fund for him. We have secured a preliminary enrollment spot at the Sterling Academy, the most prestigious private prep school in the state. He would have access to private tutors, tennis lessons, and a pediatric nutritional chef to make sure he is eating properly." Chloe turned her head and looked directly at me. Her expression was a sickening mask of artificial pity. "I visited Maya's home this past weekend," she said, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper, as if she were sharing a tragic secret with the room. "I saw the environment Jamal is living in. It is incredibly sad. There were people everywhere, loud music, and a clear lack of structure. Maya is clearly overwhelmed. And after seeing those financial documents today, my heart just breaks for her. It must be so terrifying to know your business is collapsing and you cannot even afford to keep the lights on or put food on the table for your own child." She turned back to the judge, clasping her hands together in a pleading gesture. "I do not want Jamal to suffer because his mother is going through a financial crisis. No child should have to worry about eviction notices or bill collectors. Terrence and I have the limitless resources to shield him from all of that. We can provide stability, culture, and a guaranteed prosperous future. Maya can visit him whenever she wants, but right now she needs to focus on fixing her own life. Jamal needs to come home with us. The courtroom was absolutely captivated by her performance. Even the court reporter looked slightly moved by the impassioned plea. Chloe had hit every single psychological trigger a family court judge looks for. She had painted herself as the loving, stable, affluent alternative to the chaotic, bankrupt reality I was supposedly living in. Judge Harrison leaned forward, resting his forearms on the heavy wooden bench. He looked deeply troubled. He glanced back down at the forged commercial lease default notice and the doctored bank statements Kevin had leaked to them. Mrs. Davis, the judge asked, addressing Chloe directly. If the court grants this emergency petition, are you and your husband fully prepared to assume 100% of the financial responsibility for this child immediately? Are you waiving any request for child support from the biological mother given her current financial distress? Absolutely, Your Honor, Chloe answered without a second's hesitation. We do not need a single dime from Maya. My family has more than enough wealth to support Jamal for the rest of his life. We just want him safe. Thank you, Mrs. Davis. You may step down, the judge said. Chloe stood up and walked back to the petitioner's table. Terrence reached out and took her hand, giving it a proud, affectionate squeeze. He looked across the aisle at me, his eyes burning with absolute victory. He had successfully cornered me. He had used my own cousin to steal my financial data. He had used his wife's tears to manipulate the judge's emotions. And he had used his lawyer's theatrical presentation to assassinate my character. Becky leaned forward from the gallery and whispered loudly enough for me to hear. It is over, Maya. Judge Harrison let out a heavy sigh, taking off his reading glasses and placing them next to his gavel. He looked directly at my lawyer, Mr. Caldwell, and then his gaze shifted to me. The atmosphere in the courtroom felt as heavy as lead. Ms. Davis, the judge, began, his voice carrying the solemn weight of a man about to make a life-altering decision. The family court system has a primary directive to prioritize the physical and emotional safety of the minor child above all other concerns. I understand that you have been the primary caregiver for the last 10 years, and I commend you for that effort. However, the court cannot ignore the overwhelming evidence presented here today. He picked up the forged bank statements, tapping them against the wood. These financial records are catastrophic. A notice of default on your commercial properties, maxed out credit lines, and the sudden loss of your primary corporate revenue streams indicate that you are facing immediate financial ruin. The court cannot allow a child to remain in an environment where basic necessities like housing and food are in imminent jeopardy, especially when a highly stable and extremely affluent alternative is standing right in front of me. Terrence actually let out a quiet sigh of relief. Chloe smiled, touching her chest. They were seconds away from walking out of this building with the legal right to take my son. Mr. Caldwell, Judge Harrison, continued, looking at my attorney. Unless you have some miraculous evidence to prove that these financial documents are entirely fabricated, or that your client has suddenly come into a massive undisclosed fortune, I am strongly inclined to grant the petitioner's request for temporary physical custody, effective immediately. Mr. Caldwell looked at me. He knew exactly what was inside the heavy black leather binder sitting on the table between us. He knew about the real estate holdings, the 7 corporate franchises, and the massive stock portfolios. He gave me a slight nod, asking for permission to stand up and completely obliterate the other side. But I shook my head slightly, telling him to stay seated. I did not want my lawyer to speak for me. Terrence had spent the entire weekend trying to silence me, trying to bully me, and trying to use my family to break me. He thought he could pay a man in a suit to talk me out of my son. If Terrence's entire argument relied on the idea that I was a helpless, destitute woman, I was going to be the one to look him in the eyes when I tore his world completely apart. I placed my hands flat on the wooden table and pushed my chair back. The wooden legs scraped loudly against the floor, breaking the heavy silence in the room. I stood up, smoothing the front of my emerald green suit. I did not look at Chloe. I did not look at the lawyer. I locked my eyes entirely on Terence. Your Honor, I said, my voice ringing out clear, strong, and completely devoid of fear. I do not need my attorney to speak on my behalf, and I do not need a miraculous fortune to prove my stability. Before you make your final ruling, I would like to exercise my right to cross-examine the petitioner, Terence Davis, directly. Richard Sterling immediately jumped to his feet, his chair scraping loudly against the polished floor. Your Honor, I object, Sterling barked, waving his hand dismissively in my direction. Ms. Davis is represented by counsel. This is highly irregular and completely inappropriate for a family court proceeding. She is clearly emotionally compromised. I did not back down or look at the lawyer. Your Honor, I countered, keeping my gaze fixed firmly on the bench. As a named respondent in this custody petition, I have the absolute legal right to question the petitioner regarding the sworn statements he just submitted to this court. If Mr. Davis is truly the bedrock of financial stability he claims to be, he should have absolutely no problem answering a few simple questions from the mother of the child he is trying to take. Judge Harrison studied me for a long, heavy moment. He looked at the forged bankruptcy documents sitting on his desk, and then back at my unwavering posture. I will allow it, Ms. Davis, the judge ruled, striking his wooden gavel once. But keep it strictly relevant to the matters at hand. Mr. Davis, please take the stand. Terence practically strutted to the witness box. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive Italian suit and flashed a reassuring, arrogant smile at Chloe before sitting down. He looked at me with absolute condescension. He thought my decision to question him myself was the desperate, erratic flailing of a defeated woman. He thought I was going to stand there and beg him to drop the petition or cry about how hard I worked. He was so blindingly arrogant that he did not even realize he was walking directly into a trap that I had meticulously laid for him. I stepped out from behind the respondent's table. I did not bring my heavy black leather binder with me. I left my true financial portfolio sitting exactly where it was. I did not need to defend my wealth yet because my first objective was to completely destroy his. I walked slowly toward the center of the courtroom, stopping just a few feet away from the wooden witness box. The entire gallery was dead silent. Mr. Davis, I began, my voice calm and perfectly measured. Today you and your legal team have painted a very specific picture for this court. You have claimed that my financial situation is a direct threat to Jamal, and that your wealth is the absolute solution. Is that correct? That is correct. Maya Terence replied, his tone dripping with patronizing patience. We just want to give him the life you clearly cannot afford anymore. I ignored the jab entirely, keeping my expression completely neutral. And you are the founder and chief executive officer of Apex Technology Solutions, correct? I asked. I am the CEO. Yes, Terence answered, leaning back comfortably in his chair and resting his manicured hands on his lap. And you currently reside in a gated 10,000 square foot estate in the northern suburbs. You drive a luxury European sports car. You maintain an elite country club membership, and you have promised this judge that you possess the limitless financial resources necessary to fully support Jamal without a single dime of child support. Is that also correct? Terence smiled, a wide, smug grin that made my blood run cold. Yes, Maya. I have worked very hard to build a highly successful life. I am a wealthy man, and I can provide absolute financial stability for my son. I want the court reporter to make sure that statement is perfectly transcribed, I said, projecting my voice loudly enough for the entire room to hear. Because I want it on the official record that Terence Davis just committed perjury in front of a superior court judge. Sterling was instantly on his feet, his face flushed a dark, angry red. Objection, Your Honor! Sterling shouted, pointing a finger at me. That is outrageous and inflammatory. Ms. Davis is badgering the witness and making completely baseless accusations. I did not even look at the lawyer. I turned on my heel and walked back to my table. I reached into my briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope sealed with red tamper evidence security tape. I walked directly up to the bailiff and handed him the envelope. Your Honor, I am submitting Respondent's Exhibit A into evidence. I stated, my voice cutting right through Sterling's loud, frantic objections. What the bailiff is handing you right now is a verified comprehensive forensic accounting report. It was compiled this weekend by one of the top financial investigative firms in the state of Georgia. It details the exact legal ownership of every single asset Terrence Davis just claimed to possess under oath. Judge Harrison held up a hand, silencing Richard Sterling immediately. The judge took the heavy envelope from the bailiff, broke the red security tape, and pulled out the bound report. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the crisp turning of the thick parchment paper as the judge opened the file. Terrence shifted in his seat, his arrogant smile faltering for the very first time. He looked over at Sterling, who suddenly looked incredibly nervous, gripping the edges of his podium. Becky leaned forward in the gallery, her brow furrowing in deep confusion. They had spent the entire weekend focused entirely on stealing my financial data. They never stopped for a single second to consider that I might have spent my weekend digging into theirs. "Mr. Davis," I said, turning back to face him in the witness box, "you just swore under oath that you are a wealthy, stable provider. But according to the forensic audit, you do not actually own that 10,000 square foot estate in the northern suburbs, do you?" Terrence swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing visibly against his silk tie. "We are married." He deflected his voice, suddenly losing its smooth, polished edge. "What is hers is mine. That is not what the state property registry says." I fired back, stepping closer to the stand so he could not look away from me. "The deed to that house is held exclusively in an irrevocable trust controlled entirely by your father-in-law. You are not on the mortgage. You are not on the deed. You are essentially a long-term guest in that house." Judge Harrison flipped to the second page of the report, his eyes scanning the highlighted sections rapidly. "And the European sports car you drove to my house on Saturday," I continued, my voice rising with absolute, undeniable authority. "The title for that vehicle is completely in Chloe's name. Your country club membership is a spousal add-on to Chloe's primary account. In fact, Mr. Davis, according to the forensic trace of your personal banking history, you do not possess a single liquid asset over $10,000 to your name. You are entirely financially dependent on your wife." Sterling slammed his hand on the table. "Your Honor, I object. My client's marital financial arrangements are completely irrelevant to his ability to parent. They are entirely relevant when he just spent the last hour using forged documents to accuse my client of financial instability." Mr. Caldwell suddenly boomed from the respondents' table, speaking up for the very first time. "The petitioner has actively and maliciously misled this court regarding his capacity to provide." Judge Harrison did not even acknowledge the objection. He was completely engrossed in the forensic report, his eyes widening behind his glasses. He turned to the third page and suddenly stopped reading. His entire posture shifted. He slowly lowered the document and looked over his glasses, staring directly at Terrence with an expression of absolute disbelief. His jaw literally dropped. Terrence looked like a deer caught in the headlights. The polished, wealthy CEO persona was cracking wide open, exposing the pathetic, broke imposter hiding underneath. "But that is just your personal life, Terrence," I said, delivering the final devastating setup before the absolute kill shot. "Let us talk about that highly successful technology firm you claim to run. You presented yourself to this judge as a brilliant, stable entrepreneur capable of providing my son with an elite future." I turned to look at Judge Harrison. "Your Honor, I ask that you read the final section of that report aloud for the court record, the section regarding the current operational status of Apex Technology Solutions." The judge looked down at the paper. He read the words silently to himself one more time, as if he could not believe the absolute audacity of the man sitting in his courtroom. When he finally spoke, his voice was completely drained of the sympathetic pity he had shown me earlier. Now it was entirely filled with cold, judicial fury. "Mr. Davis," the judge said, his voice echoing like thunder in the quiet room, "according to this verified financial audit, your company Apex Technology Solutions has 0 active client contracts. Your corporate accounts are overdrawn by $80,000. And most disturbingly, you have defaulted on your commercial office lease for the past 6 consecutive months." Chloe gasped loudly from the petitioner's table, pressing both hands over her mouth. She stared at Terence in absolute horror. He had lied to her too. He had told her his business was thriving and that he was an equal partner in their lavish lifestyle. She was realizing in real time that she had married a complete financial parasite. Judge Harrison gripped the edges of the report, his knuckles turning white. You stood in my courtroom and accused this mother of impending bankruptcy, while your own company is facing immediate eviction and total financial ruin. You are not a wealthy provider, Mr. Davis. You are completely insolvent. Terence gripped the edge of the witness box, his knuckles matching the judge's in sheer tension. Your Honor, that report is completely taken out of context, Terence stammered, his polished voice cracking under the immense pressure. Tech startups frequently go through restructuring phases. It is perfectly normal to carry operational debt while securing new venture capital. Judge Harrison slammed his hand flat against the bench. Do not insult my intelligence, Mr. Davis, the judge fired back. 6 months of unpaid rent is not a restructuring phase, it is a catastrophic failure. You lied to this court about your financial stability to secure an emergency custody order. Terence was completely unraveling. He pointed a shaking finger across the room at me. Even if my company is experiencing a temporary cash flow issue, it does not change the fact that she is completely bankrupt, he shouted desperately, clinging to his original strategy. You saw the documents, Your Honor. She is facing eviction too. She lost her biggest clients. You cannot send my son back to a woman who cannot even afford to keep the lights on. I stepped forward, my emerald green suit catching the harsh fluorescent light of the courtroom. Those documents are entirely fake, Terence, I said, my voice slicing through his panic like a blade. The entire courtroom froze. Judge Harrison looked up from the bench, his eyes darting between me and Richard Sterling. I turned to address the judge directly. Your Honor, the financial records Mr. Sterling submitted to this court this morning were completely fabricated by me, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly even. On Friday afternoon, I realized that my highly confidential corporate client list had been illegally accessed. 3 of my largest contracts were mysteriously canceled by wealthy individuals connected to Chloe's family. I knew my ex-husband had planted an informant inside my home, so I deliberately created a fraudulent set of bankruptcy documents and allowed them to be stolen. I baited Mr. Davis into bringing those fake records into this courtroom so he would eagerly commit perjury and expose his true motives. Richard Sterling looked like he was about to have a heart attack. He took a massive step away from Terence, physically distancing himself from the imploding disaster of his client. Your Honor, I had absolutely no knowledge that those documents were unverified. Sterling frantically clarified, trying to save his own legal license. My client presented them to me as authentic financial records obtained through a concerned family member. Through a spy, I corrected, coldly glancing over my shoulder at Becky, who was suddenly shrinking down in her gallery seat. A spy who was paid $50,000 by your sister-in-law to steal my private data. Judge Harrison was absolutely furious. Miss Davis, the judge, warned, his voice low and dangerous. Creating fake documents and allowing them to be submitted as evidence is an incredibly risky maneuver in a court of law. You had better have the actual authentic records to back up your claims of financial stability right now. I did not even blink. I nodded to Mr. Caldwell, who immediately stood up and carried the heavy black leather binder to the bailiff. Your Honor, what you are about to look at is the true operational and financial portfolio of Davis Culinary Enterprises, I stated proudly. 10 years ago, when Mr. Davis abandoned his unborn child to pursue a wealthy mistress, I did not just sit around baking cupcakes in a residential kitchen. I incorporated, I expanded, and I built an absolute empire. Judge Harrison opened the heavy binder. The anger on his face was instantly replaced by profound shock. As you will see on the first page, Your Honor, my company is not a sole proprietorship. I explained, my voice echoing with a decade of hard-earned triumph. Davis Culinary Enterprises is a multi-million-dollar franchised corporation. We currently own and operate 7 high-volume commercial kitchen locations across the state of Georgia. We hold exclusive municipal catering contracts with the city government and 3 major state universities. I paced slowly in front of the witness box, making sure Terrence heard every single word. I do not have a single maxed-out line of credit, I continued. My company carries 0 operational debt. My personal net worth completely eclipses the trust fund allowance Mr. Davis has been living off of. I am not a struggling single mother, Terrence. I am a corporate chief executive officer. And unlike you, I actually own the company I run. Terrence sat frozen in the witness box, his mouth slightly open, his eyes wide with absolute disbelief. He looked at the confident, wealthy woman standing in front of him and realized he had no idea who I was anymore. The woman he left 10 years ago was gone, and he had just tried to declare war on a titan. But I was not finished. The financial dominance was just the beginning. Now it was time for the absolute fatal blow. I reached into the inner pocket of my tailored suit jacket and pulled out a neatly folded legal document. I unfolded it slowly, making sure the crisp rustle of the heavy paper carried across the silent courtroom. Your Honor, I said, holding the document up. The forensic audit you read earlier stated that Terrence's tech startup is 6 months behind on its commercial rent and facing immediate eviction. I would like to submit Respondent's Exhibit B to the court. This is the official commercial lease agreement for the downtown high-rise building currently occupied by Apex Technology Solutions. Judge Harrison leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Miss Davis, why are you submitting the petitioner's commercial lease agreement? Because, Your Honor, I replied, a cold, ruthless smile finally breaking across my face. According to the property deed filed with the city, the 30-story commercial high-rise building, where Mr. Davis operates his failing tech startup, is owned by a private real estate holding firm called DCE Properties. And as the chief executive officer and sole proprietor of Davis Culinary Enterprises, I am also the sole owner of that holding firm. The air was instantly sucked out of the room. Terrence's face turned the color of wet ash. That is right, Terrence, I said, turning to look him dead in the eye. I am your landlord. You have been paying rent to me for the last 3 years. And because you have defaulted on your lease for 6 consecutive months, I exercised my legal rights as the property owner this morning. I checked the gold watch on my wrist. At exactly 8 o'clock this morning, while you were putting on your expensive suit to come down here and steal my son, I authorized my corporate attorneys to execute a hostile takeover of your business assets. I announced, my voice ringing with absolute finality. The locks on your headquarters have been changed. Your servers, your office furniture, and your intellectual property have all been seized to cover your massive outstanding debt. Apex Technology Solutions no longer exists, Terrence. You are completely wiped out. Terrence let out a strangled, pathetic sound, gripping the railing of the witness box, as if the floor had just dropped out from under him. But before he could even form a coherent sentence, a loud, piercing shriek erupted from the petitioner's table. Chloe stood up, knocking her heavy wooden chair backward onto the floor. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger at Terrence, her face twisted in absolute fury. You lied to me, she screamed, her voice echoing wildly off the high ceilings. You told me you were a successful founder. You told me you were an equal partner. You have been using my family trust to fund your pathetic lifestyle while your company was secretly dying. Terrence raised his hands desperately, trying to calm her down from the witness box. Chloe, please let me explain. He begged, his polished facade entirely shattered. I just needed time to secure more funding. That is why we needed Jamal. Once we got custody, your grandfather would have released the next tier of the trust fund principal. I was going to use that money to save the company. The absolute truth spilled out of his mouth in a moment of pure panic. He had never cared about Jamal. He had never wanted to be a father. He just needed my 10-year-old son to serve as a biological key to unlock his wife's family vault, so he could cover his massive financial failures. You disgust me! Chloe spat, her voice venomous and filled with absolute hatred. You used my infertility to orchestrate a payout. Do not ever speak to me again. I am filing for divorce the second I leave this building, and my father's lawyers are going to make sure you walk away with absolutely nothing." Chloe grabbed her designer handbag and stormed down the center aisle of the courtroom, her expensive heels clicking furiously against the floorboards. As she reached the heavy double doors at the back of the room, they suddenly swung inward. A tall, broad-shouldered man wearing a plain gray suit stepped into the courtroom, completely ignoring the furious heiress pushing past him. He walked straight down the center aisle, his eyes scanning the gallery. The bailiff stepped forward to intercept him, but the man simply held up a leather badge case, identifying himself as a licensed state process server. The man stopped at the first row of the gallery and looked directly at Becky, who was practically trembling in her seat. "Rebecca Davis," he asked, his voice loud and clear. Becky stared at him, her face completely drained of color. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible. The man dropped a massive stack of thick legal documents directly into her lap. "You have been served," he stated flatly, before turning on his heel and walking right back out the door. Becky looked down at the massive packet of papers, her hands shaking so violently she could barely turn the cover page. I turned my attention to the terrified woman sitting in the gallery. "Your Honor." I addressed the bench one final time. "Those documents are a $5 million civil lawsuit filed by my corporate legal team against Rebecca Davis and her husband. We are suing them for corporate espionage, theft of trade secrets, and tortious interference with a business relationship. She paid my cousin $50,000 to steal my data, and now she is going to lose everything her husband owns trying to defend herself in federal court." Becky let out a loud, dramatic sob, burying her face in her hands, as the absolute reality of her situation crushed her. She had tried to play the wealthy savior, and now she was facing total financial ruin. I looked back at Terrence, who was still sitting in the witness box, completely broken, bankrupt, and abandoned by the wealthy wife he had sacrificed everything to secure. I had not just defended my son. I had completely dismantled the lives of every single person who had tried to take him from me. Judge Harrison took a deep breath, the heavy silence of the courtroom amplifying his absolute disgust. He looked down from the bench at Terrence, who was still standing in the witness box, a hollow shell of the arrogant man who had walked in that morning. "Terrence Davis," the judge began, his voice echoing with undeniable authority and cold contempt. "In my 20 years on the bench, I have rarely seen a display of such calculated malice, perjury, and financial manipulation. You walked into this courtroom and attempted to use the judicial system as a weapon to steal a child you legally abandoned 10 years ago, all to secure a financial payout from your wife's family." The judge picked up the forged financial documents Terrence had submitted and tossed them back onto his desk with a loud slap. "Not only did you lie under oath regarding your own financial status, but you knowingly submitted fraudulent claims of bankruptcy against a mother who has done absolutely nothing but provide an exceptional, stable life for her son. You tried to destroy a successful African American female business owner just to cover up your own catastrophic failures. You are an absolute disgrace." Judge Harrison picked up his heavy wooden gavel. "Therefore, I am dismissing this emergency custody petition with prejudice. You are legally barred from ever filing for custody of Jamal Davis again in this jurisdiction. Furthermore, I am ordering you to pay 100% of Ms. Davis' legal fees. And considering the blatant perjury committed in this room today, I will be forwarding a full transcript of this hearing to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges." The judge slammed his heavy wooden gavel down onto the sounding block. "Court is adjourned." Richard Sterling did not even look at his client. The high-priced lawyer quickly shoved his remaining papers into his briefcase, snapped it shut, and practically sprinted out of the courtroom, desperate to distance his legal career from the radioactive fallout of Terrence's lies. Terrence was entirely alone. He slowly stepped down from the witness box, his legs trembling so violently he could barely support his own weight. He looked at the empty double doors at the back of the courtroom where Chloe had disappeared, taking his luxurious lifestyle, his estate, and his trust fund with her. He looked at the spot where his lawyer had abandoned him, Then he turned and looked at me. I was calmly snapping the brass latches of my leather briefcase closed, tucking my true financial portfolio safely inside. Mr. Caldwell stood beside me, offering a deeply respectful nod before he turned to gather his own coat. I picked up my briefcase and stepped out from behind the respondent's table, ready to walk out of that courthouse and head back to my empire. But before I could reach the center aisle, Terrence stumbled forward. His polished demeanor was entirely gone. His expensive tie was crooked, his face was pale, and his eyes were wild with absolute panic. He dropped straight down to his knees right in the middle of the polished hardwood floor. The sound of his knees hitting the wood echoed loudly in the emptying room. "Maya, please." Terrence begged, his voice cracking into a pathetic, desperate whine. He reached out, holding his trembling hands up toward me, looking exactly like the broken man he truly was. "Please do not do this. Do not take my company. It is all I have left. Chloe is gone. The trust fund is gone. If you lock me out of the building and seize my assets, I am completely ruined. I will have absolutely nothing to my name. Please, Maya. I am begging you. Have some mercy." I stopped and looked down at the man kneeling at my feet. 10 years ago, I had begged him. I had stood in our small apartment 6 months pregnant and pleaded with him not to abandon us. I had asked him how I was supposed to buy a crib, how I was supposed to pay the hospital bills, how I was supposed to raise a black boy all by myself while he ran off to live a bachelor fantasy. He had simply packed his bags, told me I was a burden, and walked out the door without a single ounce of mercy. I looked at him now, pleading for a financial lifeline from the very woman he had just tried to destroy. I did not raise my voice. I did not gloat. I did not offer him a single word of comfort or anger. I simply adjusted my grip on my briefcase, stepped carefully around his kneeling body as if he were nothing more than a puddle of dirty water on the floor, and walked out of the courtroom. Exactly 1 week later, the crisp morning air carried the absolute scent of victory. I was standing on the expansive glass balcony of my new executive office on the 25th floor of the DCE Properties high-rise downtown. The Atlanta city skyline stretched out before me, a concrete jungle where I had fought my way from the absolute bottom to the very top. I held a warm ceramic mug of coffee, taking a slow, satisfying sip as I looked down at the bustling street far below. Directly in front of the main entrance of the building, two of my uniformed corporate security guards were escorting a man out onto the public sidewalk. Even from 25 stories up, I easily recognized the defeated slump of Terrence's shoulders. He was not wearing a custom Italian suit today. He was wearing wrinkled khakis and a plain jacket, carrying a single brown cardboard box containing whatever meager personal items my corporate lawyers had legally permitted him to take from his foreclosed office. He stood on the curb for a long moment, looking completely lost, holding his little box of belongings. He did not have his luxury European sports car to drive away in. He had to walk to the nearest transit station, a completely ruined man stepping back into the obscurity he so rightfully deserved. I watched him disappear into the thick crowd of morning commuters, and I felt the last lingering ghost of my past completely vanish into the wind. I turned away from the balcony edge, the heavy sliding glass door closing silently behind me as I stepped back into the climate-controlled comfort of my spacious executive suite. The office was beautifully decorated, a testament to 10 years of relentless dedication and sleepless nights. But the most valuable thing in that room was not the expensive mahogany furniture or the stunning downtown view. Sitting comfortably on my plush leather sofa, completely engrossed in a handheld video game, was Jamal. He was swinging his legs, a bright, carefree smile on his face as he leveled up his character. He was safe. He was happy. He was entirely untouched by the vicious storm that had tried to tear our family apart. I walked over and kissed the top of his head. He looked up, grinned, and leaned against my side before going right back to his game. In that quiet, perfect moment, I realized the absolute truth about power. True power is not about being the loudest person in the room. It is not about driving the most expensive car or marrying into a generational trust fund. True power is the absolute ability to protect the people you love when the world tries to break them. Terrence thought my silence over the last 10 years was a sign of weakness. He thought because I did not flaunt my wealth on social media, I was an easy target. He assumed that a single black mother could never outsmart him. But he learned the hardest lesson of all. A mother's love is the most dangerous force on earth, and when you threaten her child, she will not just fight back. She will dismantle your entire existence. If you are out there fighting a battle no one else can see, remember this. Do not let their arrogance intimidate you. Do not let their threats make you shrink. Move in absolute silence. Build your fortress brick by brick while they are busy tearing others down. Let them underestimate you. Let them think they have won. And when the time is exactly right, let your success be your clapback, and let your empire be your loudest, most devastating revenge. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you found strength in this journey, please make sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this video with any mother out there who needs a reminder of her own incredible power. Drop a comment below and tell me how you have built your own empire against the odds. Until next time, stay strong, stay silent, and never stop building.